Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today here on Navy Sports Central. I'm your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, as we head into Saturday's game against Notre Dame, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you should be excited about the future of Navy football, even though this season has been a rough one so far. I know that sounds a little strange, but I think you'll see what I'm talking about if you stay with us. We'll also get you caught up on some of the other key fall sports as they wrap up their seasons and get ready for tournament play. And of course, we'll have our usual question of the day and mid-watch segments. So stick around. We've got a lot to talk about today. Okay, welcome back to Navy Sports Central. Whether you are checking us out for the first time or you're a returning listener, thanks for making us part of your day. So let's not waste any time and get right into it. In our sports update, we're going to talk about a couple of newly crowned Patriot League champions. Those would be both the men's and women's cross-country teams. And we'll also get a look at how the volleyball team and the men's and women's soccer teams have been doing as they close out their seasons and get ready for their respective Patriot League tournaments. So let's get started with the cross-country teams. The league championships for both the men and the women were held on the Lehigh campus up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The women ran a 6K course, which is about 3.72 miles, while the men competed over an 8K distance, which is just under 5. It's about 4.96. Now, if you remember the conversation I had with Ginger Rice when we reviewed the women's cross-country team a few months ago, I think it was episode 11, she talked about how a cross-country meet is scored, and it's based on where the team members finish. In a dual meet, the goal is to place as many athletes as possible in the first 7 spots. And in the league championship, the teams were looking to do the same thing, but basically from spots 1 through 12. No matter where they finish, though, the spots for the first 5 runners from each team are the ones that counts toward the score. And for those of you who may not have caught that episode with Ginger, here is the clip from that conversation that talked about how those cross-country meets are scored. Now, let's talk a little bit about scoring, okay? Obviously, you got two or more teams competing, whether it's a dual meet or an invitational and so forth. Easy enough to determine the individual winner, but could you go into a little bit more detail on how the teams are scored at cross-country meets?
Okay, well, cross-country, whether it's a dual meet or an invitational, you are allowed to have 7 runners on the team, and then the top 5 runners get scored. So, for instance, you finish second in the race. Navy finishes, our top runner finishes second, they get 2 points. Our next runner finishes 4th, you get 4 points. And so the top 5 runners are scored, and the team with the lowest points wins the meet. What's important about runner number 6 and 7, even if you didn't place for your team, you can displace runners from other teams, making them have a higher score, and then of course not doing as well. So the goal, of course, you want to win the race, but the goal is to get as many runners across the finish line in a pack or in a group as you can, within the top 10. That gives you the best chance of winning the meet.
So there you go. Obviously, having really good team depth is critical here. And Navy coach Kim Lunas knew that she had the athletes to run this strategy again at the league championship. So here's basically how things broke down. The Mids did not have a single runner among the top 6 finishers. Those places went to Georgia Jones from Army, who came in first. And next was a runner from Bucknell, followed by 3 from Boston University. But the Mids did take places 7 through 9 and then 11 through 13. Elizabeth Sullivan was the first Navy runner to cross, and she was followed by Ellie Abraham, who was right behind her basically by less than half a second. Then the Mids' next 3 finishers were Winter Bose, Maddie Warrender, and Emily Boughton to close out the scoring. That meant Navy's top 5 runners earned 47 points, which was 5 better than Boston University. And by the way, even though Army's runner did finish first, the Black Knights finished a distant third with 70 points. Their next 4 finishers placed 14th, 17th, 18th, and 20th. So clearly they just didn't have Navy's depth. So while there was a little bit of drama between Boston University and Navy in the women's championship, the men pretty much ended all of the suspense early. Army did take first again. Marshall Beatty ended up winning the individual championship, but the Mids had a really talented group of runners who took control of the race early and just never gave it up. The Navy runners finished 2nd through 7th, starting with senior Greg Mathias, and he was followed by Brett Brady, Sam Keeney, Garrison Clark, Ashwin Briggs, and John Bowers in that order. That basically just buried the field because the final tally had Navy winning over Army by 35 points. So that was the 9th Patriot League championship for the men, while their women picked up their 5th. Congratulations to both the men's and women's cross country teams on those Patriot League titles. I got to say, you have to love it when a plan comes together, and that's exactly what happened here. Okay, now let's move on to the volleyball team. I mentioned in our last episode that if they tighten up their serving stats a little bit more, the team could surprise a few people when the tournament rolls around. And at least in the last couple of games, Navy's done a pretty good job of that. They took on Lehigh and Bucknell in their last 2 matches and beat them both 3-0. In the match against Bucknell, the Mids came up with a season-high 13 aces against only 7 service errors. So looks like they're starting to kind of clean that up, and that's going to be a good thing moving forward. Next on the schedule is a rematch with Army. That's on Saturday. The Mids have clinched a spot in a tournament with 3 games to go. They did that by nature of that win against Bucknell, I believe. And it turns out that their last 3 games happen to be against the 3 best teams in the league. Besides Army, they'll be taking on Colgate and Lafayette, who are currently in 1st and 3rd place. Army's in 2nd. So this will be a good chance for Coach Paco Labrador to really look and see what the Mids need to do to be tournament ready, because they could wind up playing one of those 3 teams again. Okay, next we have the women's soccer team led by Coach Karen Gabara. They finished the regular season with an 11-5-1 overall record, and they were 6-2-1 in the Patriot League, and that was good enough to give them a first-round bye into the semifinals. They will be taking on Bucknell, and the not-so-good news is it was the Bison that scored more goals against the Mids than any other team this season. You may recall earlier in the year, the team had this dangerous habit of giving up a goal early in the game, and I'm talking within the first 5 minutes. Not only did that happen against Bucknell in their first game, but Navy was down 3-0 before they finally scored 2 goals to close the gap. Unfortunately, they ended up losing 4-2. Now, since then, the defense seems to have fixed any issues they were having early in the game when it came to giving up those early goals. In fact, during the entire month of October, they only gave up a total of 3. So that's definitely a good sign for the Mids as they get set to defend their Patriot League title. Meanwhile, the men's soccer team also punched their ticket to the tournament when they defeated Bucknell 1-0 on Halloween. They ended up losing their last regular season game to American University, though, and that means that the Mids ended up with a number 5 seed for the tournament. They're going to be taking on Lehigh on the road on Saturday for a chance to advance to the semifinals. The Mountain Hawks beat the Mids just a couple of weeks ago in overtime 3-2, so this game looks like it's shaping up to be a real battle. All right, that pretty much gets you up to speed with cross-country, volleyball, and soccer, so we're going to go ahead and step away for a short break, and when we come back, we'll jump right in with our deep dive segment. Okay, we are back, and as we look ahead to Saturday's football game against Notre Dame, it occurred to me that I'm actually looking at the calendar right now. I'm recording this particular segment on Wednesday, November 3rd, and it was exactly 14 years ago that Navy broke that horrible 42-game losing streak against the Fighting Irish. And I will tell you, as a fan, I don't think I've ever been more happy. I know Facebook was around at the time, but I wasn't on it. My only social media presence back then was with a group hosted by the Marine Corps Marathon website. It was just a group of people who we would just basically share training tips and generally support each other as we got ready for different races. So that's where I was hanging out when it came to social media. Now, in 2007, the Navy Notre Dame game was played the weekend following that Marine Corps Marathon. And I just remember watching the game, and it was just absolutely nerve-wracking. When they went into the overtime, I just didn't know what was going to happen. And so when the Mids stopped Notre Dame on that final 2-point conversion that they had, I just went absolutely berserk. I don't think there's any other way I can put it. So I immediately went onto my group page with my running buddies, and I posted the following message in the largest typeface I could find that would still fit on the screen. And it said, after 42 years of frustration, Navy 46, Notre Dame 44, now I can die in peace. So that was literally, as a fan, the most unbelievable feeling I've ever had when it came to Navy football. Now, realistically, I'm not expecting the same outcome on Saturday, but that's not saying it can't happen. Any way you look at it, though, in order to have a chance, the Mids have to believe that they can take down the Irish. And I'm sure that they've dissected every bit of available video from that Cincinnati game when the Bearcats beat them in South Bend. That Cincinnati defense really did a good job controlling Notre Dame's big offensive weapons on their way to that 24-13 win. The Irish will have Jack Cohn lining up under center. He is a senior, and I'm pretty sure this is his first year as a starter. Anyway, he's completed nearly 64% of his passes for just over 1,600 yards and 12 touchdowns. He's been picked off 4 times, and he's also been sacked 24 times. So that's something. I mean, the Irish are 7-1, so basically he's been sacked 3 times a game. Maybe that's something that Coach Newberry can work with a little bit in terms of getting some pressure on him. Notre Dame also has a legit All-American candidate at running back in Kyron Williams. This guy is averaging about 5 yards a carry. He's got over 700 yards for the year, and his longest run from scrimmage is 91 yards. He broke that for a touchdown. So Williams has definitely got some big play capability, and he's somebody that the Mids are going to need to account for when Notre Dame is running the ball. Anyway, it's going to be really interesting to see what Coach Newberry can put together in the way of a game plan to disrupt Notre Dame's offense. If the team can come up with an effort like the one against Cincinnati or Tulsa, I'm not ruling anything out. I know that the Irish have been pushed a few times this year besides that loss to the Bearcats. For example, both Purdue and North Carolina had a great shot at beating them earlier in the season. In fact, that North Carolina game was just last week. So that's what we're looking at here. The Mids have been playing better and better every week. They had a really good month of October. I guess you can throw out the Memphis game. But I'm pretty encouraged by the way the team has been playing. Just been steady improvement on both sides of the ball. So I'm going to be really curious to see how the Mids react come game time. Now, these are the kind of games that really build tough teams. And maybe the Mids win this game, maybe they don't. But they should go into it with a lot of confidence based on how they've played these last few weeks. Now, there is one thing I do believe, and that is, regardless of the result of this game, I think that Navy football is setting itself up really well for these next couple of years. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why that's the case. Here's the first reason. The Mids are a young team offensively. Going into the Notre Dame game, they'll be starting 3 sophomores, and those 3 positions are arguably the most important ones on that side of the ball. Of course, you've got Ty Lavatai at quarterback, and then you've got Darrelson Masanaye at center. And by the way, he's been doing a really good job run blocking since he broke into the starting lineup. And then at left guard, you've got Josh Pena. Now, his biggest assignment besides run blocking is making sure he's got Lavatai's blindside covered on any potential passing plays. I mean, the last thing you want to have happen there is that side of the line to break down and just having your quarterback just getting absolutely crushed from behind. You can see that the Mids offensive line is starting to mesh really well as a unit when it comes to run blocking. And they played pretty well against Tulsa from the pass blocking side of it, too. Even though there was no passes completed, they were giving Lavatai a little bit more time to throw the ball, and that's a good thing. And the same thing happened against Cincinnati. Lavatai actually completed 11 of 15 in that game. So to me, this represents a great opportunity, not only for the 3 guys we just mentioned, but also for the entire Navy offense. And we'll get to the defense in a minute, but I just think that they should just go in there with the attitude that, hey, we played Cincinnati right down to the wire, and we're just going to do the same thing here and see what happens. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that the Mids are also a young team defensively. Now, it's true that Diego Fagot, Mikey McMorris, Kevin Brennan, and Jarius Warren are going to be tough to replace. There's no question about that. And also, Jamal Glenn has been really solid at the field corner position. But right now, there are 3 sophomores and a freshman getting some great experience in these tough games. You got Jake Busick, who was absolutely terrific against Tulsa. He recorded a sack and 1.5 tackles for a loss at defensive end. And also Donald Berniard, who we all know as Biscuit, played a huge part in shutting down Tulsa's running game right there in the middle of the line. Except for that 78-yard run that Watkins had in the second quarter when McMorris tracked him down, the defense only allowed 51 additional yards. In fact, Watkins only gained 3 more yards for the rest of the game on 4 carries. Then you have Evan Gibbons starting at the bandit position. He is Navy's 3rd sophomore that's going to be in the lineup on Saturday. So that experience he's going to be getting against a team like Notre Dame is going to be huge. And finally, the freshman who's now in the starting lineup, and he's in for Kevin Brennan, is Rayan Lane. And he's the guy who came up with that huge interception in the end zone against Tulsa. You'll recall that on that particular play, the Tulsa receiver looked like he had a sure touchdown, but the ball came off of his hands, and Lane was right there to grab it before it hit the ground. And that was critical because not only did they keep Tulsa from scoring, but then the Mids offense took the field and came down and scored the go-ahead touchdown. The Navy defense has played hard all season, and for the most part, they've done a pretty good job of keeping the team in the game. Now, it is true that they've given up some big plays, but those were more because of a miscommunication than a lack of effort. And as they get more experience playing together in these big games, those kinds of mistakes are going to go way down, which means that Navy's going to be much tougher to beat in the next couple of years. So they're your first 2 reasons. The third reason that I think things will improve for the Mids in the next few seasons is basically their strength of schedule. Most people tend to overlook that stat, and I'm not really sure why, but I do think it needs to be considered. Now, this year, Navy's strength of schedule, based on their current opponent's record this season, is the 8th toughest in the country. The teams on their schedule are a combined 57-30 going into the weekend, and we've already talked about the fact that they've played 3 ranked teams, and actually 4 now if you include Houston, although the Cougars were not ranked at the time that Navy played them. Now, on top of that, the mid-schedule happened to be front-loaded where most of their most challenging games were in the first half of the season. That could be pretty discouraging to some teams, especially if they've come off of a tough year like the Mids had in 2020. And just to give you a frame of reference with Army and Air Force, the Black Knights opponents this year are a combined 43-42, while those that the Falcons have played are a combined 45-42. So there's definitely a clear difference in the quality of the opponents. The bottom line is that even though the Mids will have the toughest schedule when you look at all 3 service academies next year, it doesn't figure to be as tough as this one because this was just a perfect storm of just different circumstances lining up against them. All those ranked teams, number 1. Number 2, most of them were in the beginning of the year. And number 3, you got a really young team having to deal with all of that. So in the end, what doesn't kill you will definitely make you stronger. And I believe that's going to be the case with the Mids next year. So those are the 3 reasons why I think Navy football is set up for some pretty good years moving forward. They're a young team on both offense and defense, and they've played pretty well against ranked teams so far this season. The Notre Dame game will be a big test, but the fact is that these guys will get a chance to see how they stack up against another top 10 team, and that should definitely motivate them. So I'm looking forward to seeing how things go. It's going to build a solid foundation for next season as far as experience is concerned. And finally, like I mentioned just a second ago, I just don't see the Mids playing one of the toughest schedules in the country again anytime soon. The law of averages pretty much will take care of that, I think. The one thing I wanted to point out before we wrap this up is that Navy doesn't need a soft schedule to put up a solid record. If you go back and look at 2 years ago in 2019, the Mids finished 11-2, and their opponents had a combined record of 87-64. So the difference was, I think Navy was a very experienced team, and I see the same thing happening between now and the next couple of years with this year's squad. So we'll have to see what happens. Okay, that's what I see coming down the road for the team. Realistically, I think they've got a decent shot at finishing 3-1 over these last 4 games, as long as they continue to improve like they have over the past month or so. If they can do that, I think it'll set them up pretty well for next season. Now, in my mind, there's only one thing that could mess that up, and I'll talk to you more about that after we take this short break. Okay, welcome back to Navy Sports Central. Carl Darden here with you. And now that I've given you my thoughts on how things are shaping up for the Mids over the next couple of years, I'm going to also tell you the one thing that I think will certainly mess that up. So let me start by saying that one of the reasons the Navy football program has been so successful over the years is because of its stability, particularly the stability of the coaching staff. Now, it's true that there were some wholesale changes made on the defensive side about 3 years ago after the 2018 season, but I haven't met a single Navy fan yet who didn't think they were necessary. Now, this year, the team has obviously struggled to get to a winning record, and the odds are they're going to miss playing in a bowl game for the second straight year. But, that's no reason to push the panic button. Like I said earlier, this is one of the youngest teams that Navy has ever fielded, and I can't even remember them playing a tougher schedule. That's just the way things happen to work out this year. So I think anyone who believes that changing up the coaching staff after the season is over needs to consider a few things. First, I think the expectations need to be realistic. My goals for the team aren't any different than those that the program has for itself. And that basically means consistently winning the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. Yeah, it'd be nice to win it every year, but that's, I don't know how realistic that is. Secondly, posting a winning record and even being in the hunt for the conference title. And then, of course, qualifying for a bowl game and coming through with a win every so often. Now, that doesn't mean I'm ready to clean house if that doesn't happen for a couple of years in a row. I get that coaching is a results-oriented profession, but it's really important not to lose perspective when you're talking about the typical orbit that Navy occupies in college football. There's some things that definitely complicate that. Number one is the fact that you got the transfer portal to deal with. So that is something that you're never going to see work in Navy's favor. That's just a reality. And secondly, they play in a pretty competitive conference, and they're dealing with a recruiting pool that just isn't as deep as what you'd have with a non-Surface Academy team. So again, really, really important to maintain some perspective. For my money, if the Mids were able to go out there and average about 7 or 8 wins a season, which of course means they may not hit that number every single year, but as long as they average it over, say, a 5 to 10 year period, I will gladly take that. For me, what happens over the long term is what counts the most. Taking these little 1 to 2 year snapshots, that just doesn't work for me. I don't think it's a good way to evaluate the program, and especially when you're dealing with the things that the Naval Academy has to manage with the transfer portal that I just mentioned and that sort of thing. So that's basically my feeling. The second thing to consider is the coaching record against the other service academies, especially Army. Now, if you look at Coach Niumatalolo's, he is 9-4 against the Black Knights and 7-7 against Air Force. And by the way, the Falcons just pulled even with this year's win. So, considering how consistent that program has been over the last, say, 3 decades, I can live with a 7-7 result against the Falcons. And even though the Mids have only beaten Army once in the last 5 years, they've never been crushed in any of these games. If you guys will remember, back between 2002 and 2015, when Navy was reeling off those 14 straight against the Black Knights, the reason Army ran through all those coaches is because they weren't just losing to the Mids; they were just getting jacked. I mean, it was just routinely, losing by 30, 40 points, multiple shutouts, that sort of thing. And that didn't happen, or that hasn't happened in these games that Army's managed to come out on top. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. During that 14-year winning streak, the Mids outscored the Black Knights 438 to 159, and the average margin of victory was 20 points. And in the 4 wins that Army's had recently, that margin of victory has only been 6 points. Now, to be fair, there were a couple of a few close games that the Black Knights had with the Mids during that streak, but I will tell you that I never got the sense that the Mids were in any danger of losing those games, except for maybe 2012, which was Keenan Reynolds' freshman year, and Army was driving down the field, but then they fumbled the ball, like I think it was on Navy's 12-yard line. But to me, the only time the Black Knights clearly had a better team was in 2018 and again last year. And even those games weren't decided until basically the middle of the second half. In fact, I still believe that in 2016, if Will Worth hadn't have broken his foot in the AAC championship game, that the Mids would have won that game against Army easily. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to predict what's going to happen in this year's game, and I certainly don't think Coach Niumatalolo's future depends on the outcome, which brings me to my third thing to consider. I believe that, for the way that Navy has to play to stay competitive in Division I football, you're just not going to find anybody better than who Navy has right now in Coach Niumatalolo. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's won the most games in the program's history by a huge margin. Now, some people think that Navy actually has to get away from the triple option, but I think just the opposite. That system is what keeps the team competitive at the Division I level. And if you need any proof of that, all you got to do is look at Air Force's program. They have been running their version of the triple option since the mid-'80s, and they've done pretty well. In fact, the Falcons won a division in the Mountain West in 2015, and the Mids have finished either first or tied for first in the AAC 3 times since they joined the conference. So scrapping the option would be a mistake in my mind. I do think that each year the staff looks for ways to tweak the triple option to play to the team's strengths. That's what they did with Malcolm Perry a couple of years ago. But even that didn't happen overnight. That basically took an entire off season to kind of smooth out. But he worked his tail off, and you saw the results with that 11-2 season and that record-breaking year that he had. My thinking is that if Ty Lavatai can avoid any kind of serious injury, I see him becoming really, really productive over these next couple of years. And quite frankly, the coaches already have a blueprint for what works for a quarterback like him. His name is Will Worth. So I think that's what's been going on ever since Lavatai became the starter. The staff has been working to find the little tweaks that will allow him to use his strengths as a passer a little bit more frequently, assuming you're staying within the framework of the triple option. But the one thing I want you guys to remember is that Worth was very effective because he had 3 years to learn the system before he finally took over. This is really Lavatai's first year since he couldn't practice with the team as a freshman during the summer because of the pandemic. And he's really improved since the beginning of the year. I mean, I can certainly see that. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit to see Ty Lavatai putting up the same kind of numbers that Will Worth did during his senior season as the starting Navy quarterback. The bottom line is I can't see making any changes after the season is over based on just the past 2 years, one of which was just so disruptive it was ridiculous. The time to consider making a coaching change is when the program can no longer attract the level of quality recruits that they are now. And you don't need to look any further than the Cincinnati game to see the potential of these 2 most recent classes anyway. You've got freshmen and sophomores starting in 3 really important positions on both sides of the ball. And the Mids fought the number 2 ranked team in the country all the way down to the end. And to me, that says quite a bit about the future of Navy football. We'll be right back. All right. Thanks for staying with us, everybody. As usual, we're going to go ahead and wind up this episode with our question of the day and mid-watch segments. I had a pretty good response to the question from our last episode. If you recall, it referenced the most recent Army-Navy star matches, and I asked everybody, of the 6 wins over Army this year, which one has been your most favorite? So remember, we're talking about sprint football, men's and women's cross country, men's golf, and men's and women's soccer. It looks like the top vote getter was sprint football with 14, and then in second place you had men's soccer with 11 votes. After that came women's soccer with 4 votes, and finally men's cross country was the 4th sport picking up votes with a total of 3. Now, for the record, I ended up going with men's soccer because it was such a convincing win, number 1, and it was also the first time that Navy had picked up the Army-Navy Cup since 2014. But I will tell you that it was a pretty close vote for me between men's soccer and men's golf, just because of the dramatic way that the men's golf team closed out that match with sudden death. So that brings us to this episode's question of the day, and it's pretty similar to the last one, except that it refers to the Navy Notre Dame series. So here it is. Besides 2007, which Navy win over the Irish was the most memorable for you, and why? And just to refresh your memory, the other 3 wins that Navy picked up over Notre Dame in the triple option era were in 2009, when they won 23-21 in South Bend. And then in 2010, they came through, I believe that game was up in the Meadowlands. They won 35-17. And then most recently in 2016, and I believe that game was played down in Jacksonville, Navy won 28-27. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up on the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page later today, and I'll pin it to the top so you can find it pretty easily. Now, be sure to post a short comment saying why your pick was the most memorable, and I'll read a couple of those on the air as well during the next episode. Okay, time to finish up with our mid-watch segment. First, let's go ahead and check in with Avery Stoll from the volleyball team. She did have a couple of solid games against Bucknell and Lehigh. Those were Navy's last 2 wins. Against the Bison, she registered 5 kills and 3 service aces, and then she followed that up with 8 more kills to go along with 5 blocks against the Mountain Hawks. For the season, Stoll ranks first on the team with 192 kills, and she's got 24 service aces, which is good for third behind Jamie Llewellyn and Cammie Herman. And then on the defensive side, the senior from Yorba Linda, California, is also third in blocks with 44 behind Maggie Bodman and Anna Kleemeyer. So as we look into these last 3 games here, there are great opportunities for the team to keep working on any rough edges that they need to smooth out before the tournament starts. And if they can win a couple of those games, they may be able to improve on their tournament seeding depending on what happens with the teams in front of them. And then finally for the men, we're tracking Ashwin Briggs from the men's cross country team. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, he was the 5th and final Navy runner that contributed to the team score to help the Mids roll to that Patriot League championship. The senior captain covered the 8K course in 25 minutes and 21 seconds. And just to give you an idea of how good a job the team did finishing as a pack, there were only 15 seconds separating Briggs from the second place finisher, Greg Mathias. And it also looks like he'll barely have enough time to catch his breath before the indoor track season starts. I just checked out the calendar, and the Navy Invitational is set for December 4th. Briggs is one of the top middle distance runners on the team, and he mainly focuses on the 800 meters. In fact, he was the Patriot League champion in that event back in 2020 as a sophomore. That's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. We have been getting a great response to our question of the day, so if you want to jump in on that, just go to the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page, and I'll go ahead and pin it to the top so you won't miss it. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used in Navy Sports Central comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great site for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.